Picture this, you're staring at your bank statement and there's actually money left over after paying your bills. I know, it sounds like science fiction, but bear with me. Now you're faced with a choice that could literally determine whether you retire sipping cocktails on a beach or eating ramen noodles in your studio apartment at 75. Should you throw that extra cash at your debts like you're playing financial whack-a-mole, or should you invest it and let compound interest work its magic while you sleep? This isn't just some casual weekend decision like choosing between Netflix and Hulu. This single choice could mean the difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime, maybe even millions if you play your cards right. And here's the kicker. Most people make this decision based on gut feeling rather than actual math, which is about as effective as using a magic 8-ball to plan your retirement. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, so you don't have to. If you're tired of making financial decisions that feel like throwing darts blindfolded, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps clear the fog. Now, before we dive into this epic battle between debt elimination and wealth building, let me hit you with some reality. We're not talking about whether to pay off your credit card debt from that shopping spree where you convinced yourself you needed 17 different phone cases. We're talking about the strategic decision that separates people who build real wealth from those who spend their entire lives making other people rich through interest payments. The truth is, there's no universal right answer here, which is probably why your brain hurts every time you think about it, but there are some fundamental principles that can guide you toward the choice that makes the most sense for your specific situation. And yes, your situation is probably more unique than you think, even if you feel like you're just another face in the crowd of financial mediocrity. Let's start with something that might blow your mind. When you pay off debt, you're essentially earning a guaranteed return equal to the interest rate on that debt. Think about it this way. If you have a credit card charging you 22% interest and you pay it off, that's like earning a risk-free 22% return on your money. Try finding that kind of guaranteed return in the stock market. Go ahead, I'll wait. This is where things get interesting though. The stock market has historically averaged around 10% annually over long periods. Notice I said historically and over long periods because the market doesn't care about your timeline or your feelings. Some years it gives you 30% returns, and other years it takes away 38% of your money just to keep things spicy. So here's the million-dollar question, literally. Does it make sense to pay off a debt with a 5% interest rate when you could potentially earn 10% in the market? The math seems obvious, right? 5% guaranteed versus 10% potential equals invest the money and profit the difference. But if math were the only factor in financial decisions, we'd all be driving sensible cars and eating rice and beans every meal. The reality is that risk changes everything. When you pay down debt, you're getting that guaranteed return I mentioned earlier. There's no market crash that can take away the interest you're no longer paying. There's no economic recession that can reduce the psychological benefit of having one less payment to worry about each month. It's boring, predictable, and absolutely guaranteed. Investing, on the other hand, is like dating someone who's absolutely amazing when things are going well, but might completely disappear when you need them most. The returns can be spectacular, but they come with the very real possibility of watching your money evaporate faster than your motivation to exercise in January. Let me paint you a picture with some real numbers, because nothing makes financial concepts clearer like seeing actual dollars at work. Imagine you've got a mortgage for $350,000 at 4% interest over 30 years. Your monthly payment is sitting around $1,670, and you've managed to scrape together an extra $1,000 each month that you could either throw at the mortgage or invest. If you decide to channel your inner debt-slaying warrior and attack that mortgage with the extra $1,000 per month, you'll be mortgage-free in about 14 and a half years instead of 30. That's cutting your debt timeline in half, which feels pretty incredible. You'll also save yourself from paying about $140,000 in interest over the original loan term. Not too shabby for some extra monthly payments. But here's where it gets really interesting. Once you're debt free in that 14 and a half years, you now have both your original extra $1,000 plus your former mortgage payment of $1,670 to invest each month. That's $2,670 monthly going straight into investments for the remaining 15 and a half years of our 30-year timeline. Running those numbers through the investment calculator, assuming that 10% average return, you'd end up with roughly $1.2 million in your investment account. Subtract the interest you didn't pay because you killed the mortgage early, and you're looking at about $1.1 million in total wealth after 30 years. Not bad, right? But before you start planning your early retirement party, let's see what happens if you take the opposite approach. What if you make the minimum mortgage payment and invest that extra $1,000 from day one? This is where compound interest starts flexing like it just joined a gym. By investing that $1,000 monthly for the full 30 years while making minimum mortgage payments, your investment account grows to approximately $2.2 million. Yes, you'll pay about $250,000 in mortgage interest over those 30 years, which stings a little. But even after accounting for that interest expense, you're still sitting pretty with about $1.9 million in total wealth. That's a difference of roughly $800,000 between the two strategies. $800,000. That's not pocket change we're talking about here. That's the kind of money that transforms your golden years from a financial struggle into an actual golden period of your life. Now, before you rush off to dump every spare dollar into index funds, remember that these calculations assume a lot of things go according to plan. They assume the market delivers that historical average return, which it might not do during your specific investing timeline. They assume you actually stick with the plan for 30 years without panic selling during the inevitable market crashes. And they assume you don't encounter any major life emergencies that force you to cash out your investments early. The mortgage example is actually one of the more extreme cases when it comes to this debt versus investment decision. Mortgages typically offer some of the lowest interest rates available to regular humans, often barely above the rate of inflation. This makes them what I like to call good debt, if such a thing can exist. It's money borrowed at such reasonable rates that smart investors actually want to keep these loans around as long as possible. But here's something most people don't think about when they're running these calculations in their heads at 3 in the morning. Inflation is quietly working in your favor when you have fixed rate debt. That mortgage payment of $1,670 feels pretty hefty today, but in 20 years, it's going to feel like pocket change. Why? Because inflation makes everything more expensive except your mortgage payment, which stays frozen in time like a financial fossil. Think about what you paid for a cup of coffee 10 years ago versus today. Your mortgage payment doesn't get that memo about price increases. In 15 years, you'll be paying that same $1,670 with money that's worth significantly less than it is today. It's like paying back a loan with monopoly money, except it's completely legal and the bank can't do anything about it. This is why some financial experts get genuinely excited about 30-year mortgages. They're not just borrowing money. They're borrowing today's expensive dollars and paying them back with tomorrow's cheaper dollars. Meanwhile, the assets you invest in tend to keep pace with or exceed inflation, so you're essentially playing both sides of the inflation game to your advantage. But let's pump the brakes on this mortgage example because not all debt is created equal. If we're talking about credit card debt, the entire conversation changes faster than your mood when you see your credit card statement. Credit cards don't mess around with their interest rates. They'll charge you 18, 22, sometimes even 29% interest, which is basically financial highway robbery with a smile. When you're dealing with high interest debt, the math becomes crystal clear. There's no investment strategy on the planet that can consistently and safely beat credit card interest rates. Sure, you might get lucky with some hot stock tip from your cousin who thinks he's the next Warren Buffett, but you're more likely to lose your shirt than beat those credit card rates consistently. This is where the debt avalanche method comes into play. You attack your highest interest rate debts first, regardless of balance size, because mathematically, it saves you the most money. It's not as psychologically satisfying as the debt snowball method, where you knock out small balances first, but your future bank account will thank you for being logical instead of emotional. Student loans occupy this weird middle ground in the debt universe. They often carry moderate interest rates somewhere between your mortgage and your credit cards, plus they come with tax deductions that effectively lower your real interest rate even further. Some student loans are sitting at 3 or 4% interest, which puts them in that questionable zone where investing might make sense. But here's where it gets tricky with student loans. Unlike your mortgage, you can't write off the interest on most student loans beyond a certain income level. And unlike your house, your education can't be repossessed if times get tough. Which sounds great until you realize it also means you can't sell it to get out from under the debt. Car loans present yet another fascinating case study in the debt versus investment debate. Most car loans hover somewhere between 4 and 8% interest, depending on your credit score and how much the dealer thinks they can get away with. But here's the thing about cars. They're depreciating assets, which means they're losing value faster than your motivation to go to the gym after New Year's. So when you're making extra payments on a car loan, you're essentially paying more money to own something that's becoming less valuable every single day. It's like paying premium prices to watch a movie that gets worse every time you watch it. From a purely mathematical standpoint, it often makes more sense to invest that extra money and let the car depreciate at its own pace while your investments hopefully appreciate. Now, let's talk about something that makes this entire decision even more complicated: your timeline and life stage. If you're 25 years old with steady income and decades until retirement, you can probably afford to take more risk with your money. Market crashes sting, but you have plenty of time to recover. You can ride out the volatility and potentially reap those higher long-term returns. But if you're 55 and starting to think seriously about retirement, those market crashes hit differently. You don't have decades to recover from a major downturn. Suddenly, the guaranteed return of paying off debt starts looking a lot more attractive than the potential volatility of market investments. Your risk tolerance isn't just about age, though. It's about your entire financial situation and, let's be honest, your personality. Some people sleep better at night knowing they're debt-free, even if it means potentially leaving money on the table. Others are perfectly comfortable carrying low-interest debt if it means maximizing their investment potential. There's also your cash flow situation to consider. Debt payments reduce your monthly flexibility, which can be a real problem if you lose your job or face unexpected expenses. Having investments is great, but they're not as liquid as having extra room in your monthly budget. You can't pay your electric bill with unrealized gains in your investment account. This brings us to an often overlooked middle ground: doing both simultaneously. Instead of choosing between paying off debt and investing, you can split your extra money between both strategies. Maybe you put half toward debt reduction and half toward investments. It's not as mathematically optimal as going all in on one strategy, but it hedges your bets and might help you sleep better at night. The key is understanding that this isn't just a math problem. It's a psychology problem, a risk management problem, and a life planning problem all rolled into one. The mathematically optimal choice might not be the right choice for your specific situation, stress levels, and financial goals. Here's another factor that most people completely ignore when making this decision: the emergency fund reality check. Before you even think about whether to pay off debt or invest, you need to have some cash sitting around doing absolutely nothing except looking pretty in your savings account. I know. Watching money earn 0.01% interest while inflation laughs at you feels about as productive as teaching your goldfish calculus. But here's the thing. If you don't have an emergency fund and your car decides to transform into an expensive paperweight, guess what happens to your brilliant debt payoff strategy or your investment portfolio? You're either pulling money out of investments at the worst possible time, or you're adding more debt to the pile you're trying to eliminate. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a giant hole in the bottom. 3 to 6 months of expenses sitting in a boring savings account isn't sexy, but it's the foundation that keeps your entire financial strategy from collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. Think of it as insurance against your own financial plans going sideways. Now, let's dive into something that makes this decision even more interesting: the tax implications that most people discover about as often as they discover a $20 bill in their old jeans. When you pay off debt, especially mortgage debt, you might be giving up some tax benefits. Mortgage interest is often tax deductible, which means Uncle Sam is essentially subsidizing part of your housing costs. Pay off that mortgage early, and you lose that deduction. But before you get too excited about keeping debt for tax purposes, remember that getting a tax deduction means you're spending money to save money. It's like being excited about a 50% off sale when you're buying something you don't actually need. Yes, you're saving money, but you're still spending money to get that savings. Investment taxes are their own special kind of headache. When you invest in taxable accounts, you'll eventually pay capital gains taxes on your profits. But here's where it gets interesting. Long-term capital gains rates are often lower than regular income tax rates. So that 10% return you're earning might be more like 8% after taxes, which changes your debt versus investment calculations. This is where tax-advantaged accounts like 401ks and IRAs become absolute game changers. If your employer offers a 401k match, contributing enough to get the full match is basically free money. It's like your boss saying, "Hey, for every dollar you save for retirement, I'll give you 50 cents. Only a financial masochist would turn down free money. Let's talk about something that keeps financial advisors awake at night: behavioral psychology and how it completely destroys perfectly logical financial plans. You can run all the numbers you want, but if you can't stick to the plan, the math becomes irrelevant faster than a smartphone from 2010. Some people are natural debt haters. They see that balance and it haunts them like a bad breakup. These folks will sacrifice potential investment gains just to sleep peacefully at night without debt hanging over their heads. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Peace of mind has value that doesn't show up in spreadsheets. Other people are comfortable with debt as long as the numbers work in their favor. They'll carry a mortgage at 4% while investing in assets that hopefully earn more than that. They treat debt like a tool rather than an emotional burden. These are the people who finance their cars at 0% interest and invest the cash they could have used to buy the car outright. Neither approach is inherently right or wrong. It depends on your personality, your financial situation, and your ability to stick with your chosen strategy through good times and bad. The worst possible outcome is switching strategies every few years based on market performance or whatever financial guru is trending on social media. Here's something that might surprise you about the investing versus debt payoff debate. Inflation can completely flip the script on what seems like the obvious choice. We've been living through a period of relatively low inflation for so long that many people forgot it exists. But when inflation starts heating up, fixed rate debt becomes your best friend while cash becomes your worst enemy. During high inflation periods, your debt payments become cheaper over time, while your investments, especially in assets like real estate and stocks, tend to keep pace with or exceed inflation. This is when carrying debt stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like a strategic advantage. You're essentially being paid to borrow money, which sounds too good to be true, but is exactly what happens when inflation exceeds your interest rate. The flip side is that during deflationary periods, which are rarer but not impossible, debt becomes more expensive over time while cash becomes more valuable. This is when paying off debt early looks like genius-level financial planning. Let's address the elephant in the room. What happens when your best-laid plans meet reality and reality wins? Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs at your financial strategy right when you think figured out. Maybe you lose, you've got everything in your job, get divorced, have a medical emergency, or decide to completely change careers and go back to school. So here's the bottom line: whether you should pay off debt or invest isn't a question with a one-size-fits-all answer. It depends entirely on your situation, your debt interest rates, and your risk tolerance. High interest debt, attack it like it owes you money. Low interest debt, like maybe let it stick around while your investments do the heavy lifting. Either way, stop overthinking it and start doing something, because the biggest financial mistake is spending so much time planning the perfect strategy that you never actually execute any strategy at all.